Hello, I'm Rena Grobe,
And I'm Madhvi Ramani,
and this is Misinformed.
where we'll be talking about our latest internet obsessions.
So, Madhvi, what did you get obsessed with this week?
So I've been thinking a lot about loneliness and isolation this week because obviously we're in week 2 of quarantine in Germany and you can see how it's affecting all of us. People are dodging around each other in the supermarkets and trying not to touch each other and all that kind of stuff. And we're not touching each other when we meet anymore. In London, my mother, she lives alone, but she always has a lot of people passing through her house. It's like Grand Central Station. She's always getting hugs from everyone who comes in and kisses, and we're no longer having this kind of physical touch anymore. And so I've been wondering about what the effect of that is and will be the longer this goes on, because it's been shown that physical touch is really important to human beings physiologically. It reduces depression, anxiety, cardiovascular disease. So I'm wondering, if we isolate because of this virus, what other effects and health effects and psychological effects is this going to cause in the future?
Yeah, I mean, my grandmother, who is 91, who has been in isolation, I think, for 3 weeks now. And she's been really great about it. She's been really understanding. And I was talking to my mom yesterday, and she doesn't know how much longer she can keep it up because it's going to take a toll on my grandmother's mental health. And my mom was saying if she dies of corona, she dies of depression. She has to make a decision about, is it better?
Between depression and potentially getting a virus.
My grandmother's an incredibly social person, and she's always grown up with a lot of people, and in her youth she lived with all her family together in one space, and they were never alone. Especially in the hard times, they all were sitting on top of each other. So all of a sudden she's a widow, she lives alone. So not that there was always a party at her house or whatever, but she had her senior groups and she had the family, and now nothing.
Yeah, I think during this pandemic, we've all realized how much, first of all, we touch our faces.
Yeah.
And also how much we normally touch each other, even if we live alone or we're not in a relationship. Because now, if you live alone, you are looking at 1 month or longer of not being physically touched. And it's being talked about a lot, the loneliness epidemic. And the word epidemic is interesting because it's also referred to in terms of an illness or a disease.
Mm-hmm.
So loneliness is linked to premature death, dementia, increased cardiovascular disease. It reduces your immunity by 45% and is linked to depression.
2 days ago, I looked after Louis, who is a dog, and when my friend gave him to me, we obviously didn't touch. She just handed over the leash, and Louis got really excited and jumped up and started hugging me, and I really had this moment where I was like, holy shit, this is the first alive being I've touched in nearly 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think that I would have such a reaction, but I was like, wow, I haven't touched anyone. And not to say that on a daily basis I went around touching everyone, but there are the little things where you sit close to someone and your arms touch, or you pat someone on the shoulder or something. So there are, beyond hugs and kisses or whatever, there are little types of social touches that are completely socially acceptable that you do miss, and they are important.
Yes.
I guess.
They are important. Tiffany Field, the head of the Touch Institute at the University of Miami's Miller School of Medicine, she did a series of studies, and one of her studies, she took one group of elderly participants who received regular conversation-filled social visits, while the other received the same social visits, but that also included a massage, so physical touch. And the second group saw emotional and cognitive benefits way over and above the first.
Mm-hmm. But on the flip side, I have been more social in these last 2 weeks. So even if I'm not physically touching people, I have been in contact with people way more often. My best friend who lives in the US, we were always talking via text or whatnot, but when you're working individuals with a time difference, it's very hard to have a lot of face-to-face time. And within the last 2 weeks, we've just FaceTimed each other, and I've just put my phone near my computer screen, and we've just worked while we're talking occasionally, but this is something we never did. And so my bond with people has been kind of strengthened. Yesterday, I spent all day on the phone.
Yeah, I think it could be a reaction to a lack of kind of touch and a and the isolation that we're reaching out to people a lot more. I'm also becoming a lot more social, for example. In a lot of the work I'm doing now is more collaborative. This podcast started because of quarantine.
Does compensating for not seeing each other by calling each other and like using social media and FaceTime and all these things, like house party, do all these things work?
I think the way we communicate over video it's difficult when we're sitting opposite each other and we're reading each other's body language and can see each other's facial movements and things like this. It's much easier to read the other person without it being stressful, I feel, because we do a lot of things instinctively through body language, through mirroring, all of that kind of stuff. And then when you're on a video call and everyone's all kind of, do I talk, do I not talk? We're not facing each other. We don't have that physicality. We have to learn how to communicate in new ways, or a way that works really well through this kind of medium.
Saying that, like, this group of friends that I have from my old job, we've been FaceTiming more in groups now than we used to see each other on a regular basis, because like it's complicated with everyone's schedules, and obviously now everyone has time. They have time to just talk to one another. I find it very overwhelming. I don't know if that really relates to loneliness, to be honest, but it is sort of a... Because when you're in a group setting, you don't all talk at once. You have one-on-one conversations within a group, or like three of you. Whereas this technology, only two people can talk at once, otherwise it's layered.
True. And then, of course, there's always the argument of whether social media is isolating, because studies have shown that millennials, even though they're more connected than ever over social media, they feel more loneliness. What do you say as a millennial?
As a millennial, I think that social media is often the scapegoat for a lot of things. And I don't think that social media is the problem. I think that with new technology, the way that we interact and the way we talk to one another is changing. But it's the example of the telephone. When the phone was first invented, people thought that it would stop people from visiting, that it would cut people off from one another, rather than being a tool to help people connect. Through social media and through the internet and all the things that I have at my disposal, I am able to stay friends and have connections with people that I would have lost. I'm still friends with my kindergarten best friend.
I think it's really great that millennials, they feel connected because they grew up with the internet.
Yeah.
And they always feel like they're connected to a bigger thing. And this leads to a lot of positive traits in this generation. On Twitter right now, Generation X is trending because we're the generation that grew up without the internet, so we can do without being connected. And a lot of us were latchkey kids, and we always have like another project on the side that we're working on just to kind of occupy ourselves, and we had to occupy ourselves a lot as children. What is interesting here is that the idea of loneliness, it was born out of an idea of being kind of disconnected, and the rise of secularism. Because before the word loneliness started appearing in print in the 1800s, the word was oneliness, which referred to the physical state of being alone, but not the experience of being lonely. You were alone, but you were never lonely because there was always God. And I feel like millennials have never really experienced, maybe when they don't feel connected to the internet, maybe they feel lonely.
Do you think the internet is our new God?
Maybe. I don't know.
There's kind of something to that, because I was talking to my friend about the quarantine, and he made the comment that he would be totally fine being in quarantine as long as he has internet. Like, the second he doesn't have the internet, he couldn't stand it to be in his house for weeks on end.
So there's a book called A Biography of Loneliness. It's by Faye Bound Alberti. And it talks a bit about his scientific, evolutionary, anthropological history of loneliness. And the feeling of loneliness is really connected to our physiology. So in this book, she talks about this theory, I think John Cacioppo, who said that the feeling of loneliness and the triggering of this fight or flight response that loneliness creates in us physiologically is tied to the survival of our species. Because human beings had to be part of a tribe or connected in a community in order basically not to be eaten by a tiger.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's a survival mechanism telling you to seek companionship.
Exactly. So your friend who feels like he can survive, but only if he's connected to other human beings, that is an evolutionary reaction.
Yeah.
And if you're lonely, for example, it releases like cortisol, which is like stress hormones.
Yeah.
Loneliness can be also linked to like hunger pains. Loneliness and social rejection light up the same part of the brain that is lit up by physical pain.
I'm saying that like the social context around loneliness has changed, right? We don't live in these societies anymore, so loneliness once had a function.
And the paradox of the times we're living in now is that isolation is actually what will ensure the survival of our species. But our physical reactions to isolation and loneliness are still those physical reactions that applied thousands of years ago. And I wonder if in the future, if this continues for a longer time, will our evolutionary physiological reactions change and make loneliness or isolation a good thing? I don't know.
No, but we were discussing this idea that isolation isn't the same as loneliness. Isolation is a physical state of being, and loneliness is a mental state of being. It's back to oneliness and loneliness, this like differentiation in the words, because here linguistically this is so important.
Yes.
Because we're saying linguistically loneliness has no opposite, first of all.
I mean, the only thing that's missing from this idea that we are not necessarily lonely in isolation doesn't factor in corporeality.
Yeah.
And I think there are so many subtle things that we're missing. For example, somebody was saying, well, it's hard in isolation that if you're feeling anxious, for example, and you're kind of alone with this feeling without any mirror to go out and to like talk to somebody about it or really be with them. And there's so many cues in your face and with mirroring and the regulation of emotions that we're missing as well. And I think our feelings can go unregulated, or our anxiety can go unregulated, if we don't have that physical proximity to another body.
Yeah, it's also really important because when you are lonely, you sort of get caught in a trap. Loneliness breeds loneliness because you stop being able to interpret social cues as well, meaning that you end up not self-isolating, but making yourself more lonely by not feeling the ability to connect to people. So after this period of intense isolation and loneliness for a lot of people, I wonder the effects that it will have on when we try to re-socialize after. Because, if this goes on until April 20th, we will have been in over like a month of isolation.
You're right. So it's been shown that if you're lonely, you can't read physical cues as well, and social interactions are way more stressful, and then that makes you stay in more.
Around 2014, it was when I was just graduating from college, and it's such a bizarre thing to really think about because actually at that time in my life, I was in school full time. I had 3 roommates. I had close friends, the people that I still to this day consider my best friends. I would see them on a daily basis. They were all, a call away. I could have gotten coffee with any of them at any time. And yet I was feeling so intensely lonely. But what ended up happening was that once I started to experience a sort of loneliness, I didn't know how to articulate it to them.
So it's communication.
It was communication.
And I think that's why men are more lonely than women.
Yeah.
One study has shown that there is no gender difference, but I'm pretty much convinced that men do not communicate as well as women and talk about their feelings and bond as closely as women do, and therefore feel more lonely. And it's a fact that men commit suicide more. And then there's this really cute club called the Romeo Club, retired old men eating out.
Yeah.
We'll link to them in the show notes, because after men retire, they just feel really lonely and they struggle to form social bonds and to join social groups. So it's a bunch of old guys kind of going out to eat out together, which really helps them.
Yeah, it's just there's so much shame. Actually, one of the key things about loneliness is shame. Because in a society where we're more interconnected than ever, and obviously we're talking specifically about our own experiences in like the Western world here, where, we interact with so many people daily, we have friends, family, just the shame of being like, I live such a privileged life, and yet I'm feeling this intense sense of loneliness, of where's that? Why am I feeling this way? I have everything. And I guess the note has been made that depression and loneliness is not the same thing, but I do think that they're incredibly closely linked, in the sense of if you are depressed, then you don't feel like you can talk about it, thus you sort of stagger yourself into a sense of loneliness. And if you are incredibly lonely, you out of this can develop depression. So they're so closely linked. And I think maybe that we're starting to get okay with talking about mental health, about like depression and stuff. But loneliness is a weird one. I also think that there's not a misunderstanding of what loneliness is. Everyone has been lonely at some point in their life. But when you live in a big city like New York, there's this thing of like, but I'm not alone. Like, I don't know if we've really understood the word loneliness in what it entails. Because I think that loneliness when you're surrounded by people is worse than loneliness when you're on your own.
We've become, as a society, so interconnected, and social is a word we use all the time. And our families, we've gone from living in small communities or small families to like bigger and bigger and bigger connections, so that we feel more connected to the world or what's happening on the other side of the planet much more as a species, that it does maybe seem absurd to say, well, I'm lonely.
Yeah.
Because technology and all of our systems has made it possible for us to be connected with everyone else on this planet. And yet, we still feel loneliness.
So Denbar said that emotional intimacy decreases 15% every year that you don't see someone face to face.
And here we go back to this idea of physicality and the body and the importance of these, our corporeal kind of interactions. And maybe it doesn't matter that we can log on to Facebook and chat with somebody on the other side of the world, or look at what's happening in Australia on the news, because we just need physical connection.
Yeah. When I'm talking to my best friend in the States, naturally topics will come up like if he went to a new restaurant or something he saw on TV or places he's going on vacation. Whereas now that we live in different countries and we talk a lot, but we don't talk as thoroughly, you can sort of catch up on people's lives via social media. You can see what they ate or where they're going on vacation.
But a lot of social media, I find, in this sense, is broadcasting. It's like a radio. There's no interaction to it. So you can see all like what they ate on Instagram and what they're doing, but you're not interacting with it. And like at home, when I spend a lot of time at home, I'm just sitting in the kitchen with my mum, or I'm in a kitchen with a bunch of people and there's a lot of cooking going on. There's many, many, many hours. And only when you spend actual space and time can you get past, oh, this is what I ate, or this is what's been going on. And then you go into a different level of conversation, which is deeper. And then you spend more time and you sit in that space for even longer. And then the conversations become deeper. It's a bit like, it's like a friendship, or it's like, you and I sit here and we do a podcast. And then eventually the conversation hopefully becomes more in depth. And if we were going to go on for hours, we would hit it even more. And that's the difference. One is a shallow interaction and the other more space and more time.
Yeah, I mean, I understand completely what you're saying, and I think I do agree to a certain extent that, like, you can't replace social interactions with social media. Not in the least bit, but also, I think it subsidizes it. Because when the world is becoming more global, we're all traveling, well, not right now, but in theory, we're all spread out all over the world. And so, I mean, isn't that the original thought of social media, that it's supposed to allow us to be connected when we're not together? And the reality of our lives now is that we're more not together than we are together. So no, like, I've had some surprising and like really nice conversations that have blossomed through social media that wouldn't have happened otherwise. Like, I am an avid bread maker even before quarantine. And one of my loaves, once something went wrong, I can't remember what happened, and I had posted it in my Instagram story. And then my best friend's friend from high school reached out and was, oh, like, it seems like this and this is what you did wrong. And turns out he's like super into bread making. And he's a drug dealer, just trying to say, like, that's what he does. He's a drug dealer, he delivers weed all through New York City. And he's not to like stereotype, but the last person you would expect to be into making bread. And it was such a nice, lovely connection that we had, where then we were like having this conversation around bread. And I was just, I never would have had this conversation with you. And I'm not saying that can replace it. I don't know, it lends a different kind of depth, I think, to relationships, because it allows us to share more and a lot. I don't know, but maybe it allows us to overshare. I have complicated feelings on social media and loneliness, apparently.
I think social media does facilitate a different type of connection that normally we would not be able to have. And one of the benefits of the internet is that you feel more confident to discuss things or say things that you might feel shy doing face to face, or you might not have the context in which to like discuss bread baking with a drug dealer in any real world context. But on the internet, in this space, you can do that. And a lot of people feel like their self-expression is freed up by the internet. So sure, it's complex and there are both sides.
Do you think people would be more willing to talk about being lonely from behind a screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. That's that.
Since we've just provided definitive answers to everything concerning loneliness, we'll wrap it up. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share it with your friends.
And if you like, you can share your internet obsession with us. Tweet us.
I am at Madhvi Ramani.
And I'm at Rena_Grobe_.
You will find links to our Instagrams and Twitters in the show notes, as well as all of the articles or studies we have referenced.
Until next time, thank you for listening. Goodbye.